The garlic bread was already on the table when I heard my husband's voice drop to something I barely recognized. We were standing in my parents' kitchen, me at the counter, slicing tomatoes, him just behind me, close enough that his words didn't carry past my ear. Everyone else was in the living room. My sister was laughing at something my dad had said. My mom was asking if anyone wanted more wine, and my husband, quietly, so quietly that I almost thought I'd imagined it, said, "I need you to look at something tonight, about your brother-in-law, before dinner goes any further." I set the knife down. I didn't ask what he meant. I knew by the way he said it. Measured, careful, the way he gets when something has already been decided and he's just waiting for me to catch up. That this wasn't small. My husband works in federal contracting, background verification. He doesn't alarm easily. He doesn't say things like that over nothing. I turned around and looked at him. He handed me his phone, face down. "Just read it later," he said. "When you're ready." I put the phone in my cardigan pocket and went back to the tomatoes. My hands were steadier than I expected. My brother-in-law's name is Trevor. He's been married to my older sister, Claire, for 11 years. They have 2 kids, a boy named Owen, who's 8, and a girl named June, who just turned 5. Trevor is the kind of man who fills up a room without trying. Tall, easy smile, always the first one to offer to carry something heavy or fix something broken. My dad loves him. My mom loves him. Even my grandmother, who takes years to warm up to anyone, started asking for him specifically at Christmases about 3 years in. He'd served in the army. That's what we all knew. 8 years, he'd said. 2 deployments. He talked about it the way veterans sometimes do. In pieces, selectively, only when asked, and even then, only so much. He kept a shadow box in their hallway. Combat patch on the left shoulder of the uniform inside. Claire had told me once that he never watched war movies, that he'd flinch sometimes at loud, sudden sounds and then laugh it off. She said it like it was proof of something, like evidence of what he'd carried. I believed it. We all did. My husband's name is Daniel. We met in our late 20s at a training he was facilitating for a government contractor I'd been hired by straight out of grad school. He's methodical in a way I used to find intimidating before I understood it. He doesn't make accusations. He doesn't speculate. When he says something, it's because he's already done the work to back it up. He'd run into Trevor's name professionally, not through any deliberate search, he told me later, but through a routine cross-reference during a project that involved military service verification. Trevor's name had come up on a document. The details hadn't matched. That was all he said at first. That was enough. I didn't read what was on Daniel's phone until everyone had gone to bed. We were staying the weekend at my parents' house. My childhood bedroom, the one with the window that looks out over the backyard oak tree. Claire and Trevor were in the guest room down the hall. I could hear Trevor laughing about something through the wall, that familiar, easy laugh, and Claire's voice underneath it, softer. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed watching me read. The document was a military discharge summary. Trevor's full name, his date of birth, his social security number, all matching. The discharge date matched what he told us. The years of service matched. But the characterization of discharge did not say honorable. It said other than honorable. It said other than honorable. And the record of deployments, the 2 he'd spoken about, the ones Claire had framed as the explanation for every hard thing about him, showed one deployment. Abbreviated. Ended early. There was a second document. A statement of service from the unit he'd claimed to have been with. His name was not on it. I read it twice. Then I sat there for a long time without reading anything at all. "How certain is this?" I asked. "Certain," Daniel said. He wasn't apologetic about it. He knew that wasn't what I needed. I stared at the window. The oak tree was just a shape in the dark. "Does Claire know?" "I don't think so," he said. "But that's not something I can tell you for certain." I didn't sleep that night. I lay there listening to the house settle, listening to the branches move outside, thinking about the shadow box in their hallway, thinking about every conversation at every family dinner where Trevor had said something careful and incomplete about what it had been like over there, and we had all leaned in and nodded and given him the particular reverence we give to people who've seen things we haven't, thinking about my sister. The next morning was Sunday. My mom made French toast. Trevor made coffee and stood at the counter doing that thing he always does, refilling everyone's mugs before they asked, joking with my dad about college football, lifting June up onto his shoulders when she wandered in, still half asleep. I watched him the entire time, not looking for something different. Just looking. Actually looking, maybe for the first time without the frame I'd always put around him. He was still the same person. That was the strange part. Nothing about him had changed. He was warm and funny and attentive to my sister in the small, practiced way of someone who has been with another person long enough to know their rhythms. He refilled her coffee without looking. He pushed the syrup toward her before she reached for it, and I thought, he's been doing this for 11 years. Every Christmas. Every Easter. Every phone call where my dad asked him about his service, his unit, his time overseas. He'd answered. He'd constructed it carefully, piece by piece, something that sounded true enough that no one ever thought to check. I went outside after breakfast, sat on the back porch steps. Daniel came out a few minutes later and sat beside me without asking if I wanted company, which is one of the things I love about him. I have to tell her, I said. He didn't try to talk me out of it or into it. He just said, I know. She's going to defend him. Probably. She's going to be angry at me. Maybe. He paused. Maybe not. I thought about Claire, the way she'd built her understanding of her marriage around certain things she believed to be true. Trevor's service was part of the architecture of who she thought she'd married. I didn't know what it would do to her to have that pulled out. I didn't know what would be left standing. But I also knew I couldn't sit at another Thanksgiving and watch my father shake Trevor's hand and say, the way he always said it, we're proud of you, son. Not knowing what I knew, I found her in the upstairs bathroom, standing at the mirror, putting on earrings, her door half open. I knocked on the frame. Can I talk to you for a second? She looked at me in the mirror. Sure, what's up? I stepped in and closed the door. I had thought about how to do this for almost 14 hours. I'd run through versions of it in my head, different entry points, different levels of gentleness, different orders of information. None of them felt right, so I just said it. Daniel came across something at work, about Trevor's service record. I need you to know what it says. She turned around slowly, the earring in her right hand not yet in. Her expression was careful in a way I recognized. She was already bracing for something, already deciding how to absorb it. I told her as clearly and plainly as I could, the discharge classification, the discrepancy in deployments, the unit record. I told her Daniel had cross-referenced it through professional channels, not through any targeted investigation, and that the documents were verifiable. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You're wrong." Not angrily, almost gently, like she was correcting a small, forgivable mistake. "Claire, records get mixed up," she said. "It happens. You don't know how the military handles this stuff. Daniel doesn't either. There are classifications and compartmentalized. It's not all in one place. It's not." "I know," I said. "I know it's complicated. But Daniel does this professionally. He doesn't know Trevor." Her voice was tighter now. "He doesn't know what Trevor went through. He doesn't know what that time cost him. You weren't there." Neither was Daniel. I let her say it. All of it. I stood there and let her push back because I understood why she needed to. I would have done the same thing. I probably would have done it longer. "I'm not asking you to end your marriage," I said when she finally stopped. "I'm not asking you to do anything right now. I'm asking you to look at what I showed you and decide what you want to do with it." She looked at the earring in her hand, set it down on the sink ledge. "I need you to leave," she said. "Please." I left. We drove home that afternoon. The weekend had collapsed into something smaller than it started. My mom hugged me at the door with a question in her eyes that I didn't answer. Daniel put our bags in the car. Trevor shook his hand on the porch with that familiar, easy grip. No sign of anything in his face, and I stood behind Daniel and looked at the shadow box through the front window, visible from the porch through the glass, and thought about the uniform inside it and the patch on the shoulder, and everything that had been built around what they were supposed to mean. Claire called me 11 days later. I was at work. I let it go to voicemail, Then I listened to the message in my car in the parking garage before I drove home. She said, I talked to him. I showed him the documents. I told him what you said. Long pause. He didn't deny it. She said it quietly, the way you say something you've rehearsed so many times it's gone flat. I sat in the car for a long time. Then I called her back. She answered on the first ring, which meant she'd been sitting there with the phone. Are you okay? I asked. A sound on the other end that wasn't quite a laugh. No, I don't know, not right now. She told me what had happened. She'd waited until the kids were at school. She'd printed the documents, Daniel's documents, and put them on the kitchen table and waited for Trevor to come downstairs. When he saw them, he'd stood very still. For a long moment, he hadn't said anything, and then he'd sat down, and he'd told her. He'd enlisted. That part was true. He'd served for just over 2 years. He'd shipped out once, for a deployment that was cut short when he was involved in an incident. Nothing criminal, she said, or at least nothing prosecuted, but a conflict with a commanding officer that had escalated in a way that ended his service. He'd been discharged under other than honorable conditions and told he would not be eligible for veterans' benefits. He'd come home without telling his family the truth. He was 23. He was ashamed. He told his parents a version of the story where the discharge was administrative, where the deployment had been completed, where he'd simply decided not to re-enlist. And then the story grew. Slowly, the way lies do when they're not confronted. A detail added here, a question deflected there. By the time he met Claire, the story had become so habitual that he sometimes forgot, briefly, that it wasn't true. He hadn't planned to deceive her specifically. He had already been deceiving everyone. She was just the next person who believed him. He cried, Claire said, which I wasn't expecting. I didn't say anything. He said he's been terrified for years that someone would find out, that he's thought about telling me and couldn't figure out how to do it without losing everything. She paused. He kept saying he was sorry, over and over. I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to know right now, I said. My dad is going to be devastated. Yes. Owen thinks he's a hero. I didn't have an answer for that one. I just stayed on the line. That was 4 months ago. I won't pretend I know exactly how their marriage will come out on the other side of this. Claire is seeing a therapist. Trevor is seeing one too. Separately for now, though they're talking about eventually going together. He's been honest with her parents, who took it about as badly as she'd predicted. He hasn't told his own parents yet. That conversation is still coming. He came to me directly, about 3 weeks after Claire called. He asked if he could speak with me and I said yes, and we sat in my kitchen and he told me he was sorry. Not in the way people sometimes apologize when what they mean is that they're sorry you found out. He was specific. He said he'd been carrying something for so long that he'd stopped thinking about who else was carrying it with him without knowing. He mentioned my dad, the way my dad had looked at him. He said that one mattered more than he'd expected it to. I told him I heard him. I wasn't ready to say more than that, and he didn't ask me to. My dad found out from Claire. I wasn't in the room. Claire told me afterward that he'd sat very quietly through all of it, and then he'd asked only one question. Does he love you and those kids? She'd said yes. My dad had nodded slowly. He hadn't said anything else for a while. I think that's where they're starting from. Which isn't nothing. Daniel doesn't talk about what he found unless I bring it up. It's not his way to make himself the center of something that isn't really about him. But a few weeks after everything surfaced, I asked him. We were sitting in the backyard after dinner, the kind of quiet evening in early fall that feels like an exhale. I asked him if he'd hesitated, before he'd told me, whether there had been a part of him that considered leaving it alone. He thought about it for a moment. Then he said, there was. For about a day. What changed? I kept thinking about your sister, he said. She deserved to know what she was standing on. Whatever she decided to do with it, that was hers to decide. But she deserved to actually decide, not just assume. I thought about that a lot since then. The difference between a person choosing to stay in something and a person not knowing they have a choice. I don't know what Trevor is exactly. I don't think he's simply a bad person. I think he made a decision at 23 that he didn't know how to undo, and then he spent the next decade and a half building a life on top of it, and somewhere along the way he started to believe that the cost of the truth was higher than the cost of the lie. He was wrong about that. The lie had a cost, too. It was just distributed across everyone else without their knowledge. Owen still doesn't know the full version. That's Claire and Trevor's decision to make, and they're making it carefully, which I respect. June is 5. She knows her dad loves her. For now, that's probably enough. My family is still figuring out what we are on the other side of this. Some things feel irrevocably shifted. Some things are more solid than I expected, because the confrontation forced a kind of honesty we probably needed anyway. Claire and I are closer than we've been since we were teenagers. Something about it, the fact that I didn't look away, that I brought her something hard because I thought she deserved the truth more than she deserved comfort. She told me she'd thought about that it wasn't the easy thing to do. I told her she would have done the same for me. She said, "I hope so. I'd like to think so." I believe her. My husband is not the kind of man who announces himself. He doesn't need credit for the things he does quietly and correctly, but I see it. I've always seen it. That thing in him that can't let something wrong just sit there uncorrected when there's a path to doing better. I fell in love with him partly because of that. Some days I find it inconvenient. But on the balance, I'm grateful for it. The shadow box is still in their hallway. Claire told me she's thought about taking it down but hasn't decided yet. Trevor hasn't asked her to. He's leaving that choice to her. I think that's the right call. Some things you don't get to determine unilaterally. The shape of what comes next, that gets built together, or not at all. I've thought a lot about the moment Trevor sat down at that kitchen table and finally stopped running. Not running from Claire, not running from our family, running from himself. From the version of himself that made a scared decision at 23 and then spent the next decade and a half building walls around it instead of doors. I don't think he's a villain. I've stopped thinking of him that way entirely. What I think now is that he's a person who learned, very young, that shame is something you bury, and then discovered, very late, that buried things don't stay buried. They just find their own way out, usually through someone else's pain. That's the part that gets me. The lie didn't only cost Trevor something, it was distributed. My dad carried it without knowing. Claire carried it. Owen, in some way he can't articulate yet, will carry some version of it too. When we make choices to protect ourselves from discomfort, we don't eliminate the weight. We just move it somewhere else, onto people who didn't agree to hold it. I used to think courage was about dramatic moments. Standing up in front of a crowd, doing something visibly hard. What I understand now is that a lot of courage is quieter than that. It looks like Daniel handing me a phone face down and trusting me to know what to do with the truth. It looks like Claire sitting across from her husband of 11 years and asking the question she already half knew the answer to. It looks like Trevor finally putting down the version of himself he'd been performing and saying, "This is what actually happened. This is who I actually am. I'm sorry, that last one took the most. I believe that." There's something I keep coming back to when I think about what Trevor did and what it cost him to undo it. Deception is exhausting in a way that honesty isn't. You have to maintain it, reinforce it, fill in gaps as they appear, redirect questions, remember what you've said to whom. He did that for years, and the whole time, according to Claire, there was a part of him that was waiting, not hoping to be caught exactly, but tired. Tired of the distance the lie created between him and every person who trusted him. You can't really be known by someone who only knows a version of you that isn't true. Trevor had a family who loved him, and he was still, in the most important way, alone. That's the thing about integrity. Not the word on a plaque version of it, but the real thing. It's not just about being honest with other people. It's about being able to live inside your own life without flinching. Trevor couldn't do that. For years he couldn't. And I think some part of him, the part that cried at that kitchen table, had known for a long time that he couldn't keep going. What I want to hold on to from all of this isn't the betrayal, it's what came after it. My dad asking one question: does he love you and those kids? Claire choosing, with full information, to stay and figure it out. Trevor walking toward something harder than the lie instead of away from it. Daniel doing the right thing not because it was easy or clean, but because he believed my sister deserved to actually choose. None of it was perfect. None of them are. Neither am I. But I think that's what it actually looks like. Not some clean resolution where everyone says the right thing and the hurt disappears, but people deciding, one difficult conversation at a time, to be more honest with each other than they were before. That's not a small thing. I'm learning to stop treating it like it is.